Cool, we are recording. So I'll kick it off. I'm Jamie Isaacs. I've been practicing domain-driven design since last September. Is that when we went to the conference, Alex? The Explore DDD? And I've
Yep.
been really excited about event sourcing. I've done CQRS architectures in the past, but never with event sourcing. And I was working on a project, an OAuth project, and thought, I wonder if we could do this with event sourcing. And I chatted with Alex, and he kind of convinced me that why not? You should do it with event sourcing. And so that's what I did. I tried to implement it.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
So let me show you what I've got. I'll share my screen. So I built this OAuth server. It's available on GitHub if you're interested in looking at the source code. It's written in Go. It uses an embedded event store called RangeDB that I created and released a few months ago. A work project, we built an event store and we did not end up using it, so I open sourced it. It's written in Go as well. Let's see. I think what you came here for is the Miro board. Do I have a link to it? Yes. I sent a link in the calendar invite if you want to go check out the Miro board as well. But here's what I did. I went to the RFC, which is right here for OAuth, and just identified all the different things that would happen and classified them as events. And so this took many weeks to come put together, but let me first show you the legend so you get a feel for what we're going to be discussing. So these are all the sticky notes. They're going to be either queries, commands, events, or business constraints. Any dotted line will be a dependency on constraints. Going from a command or a constraint to an event, there's a happy path with a solid black line. And any error path, meaning like you don't have access to do the thing that you're requesting, it will be in red. And the curly braces represent the start and end of a process. And to get an example of what a simple one would be, to onboard a user into the system would be an onboard user command. And the constraints would be, well, does the user already exist? If the user does already exist, then we have an event that says it was rejected due to an existing user. Is the password that they provided to onboard, is that secure enough based on our rules? If not, it emits an event that says that's an insecure password. If these two constraints are valid, you go to the happy path saying the user was onboarded. And if you see these dotted lines, there's a lot of OAuth flows that depend on a user being onboarded. Does that make sense? Okay, good. So I did that for the rest of what I discovered as all of the events in OAuth. And this is kind of what I came up with. There's an authorization code grant type. There's a refresh token grant type. There's an implicit grant type. There's a client credentials grant type. And then resource owner password credentials grant type. This is a pretty common one. And I think that's it. And what I was missing when I created this, since I had never done event sourcing or event storming before, I didn't know how to turn this into code. And because I didn't know where all the events went. The only project I had done before this just dealt with projections, and projections are easy. You just read the events and then you build these projections. So I came across Adam's website called eventmodeling.org, and he's got a post about what event modeling is. I don't want to dive too deep into the terminology and what this stuff means. I just want to show you how I turned the events into this event model. Let's hide that. Okay. So for example, in client credentials, you would have a command for requesting an access token, and then you would either get that access token or you would get some other error. So let me show you client credentials. So here is my version of an event model for client credentials. To start off, a client application would need to be onboarded. Is this readable to everybody? Maybe I'll zoom in just a little bit more.
A little bit, yeah.
Okay.
That's better.
Right, so this, bring this down so you can see it. Okay. How do you, okay, there we go. So a development user would onboard a client application, and this is just a resource that can gain access to a thing in the OAuth terminology. If that's successful, then an event is emitted called client application was onboarded. And that goes into the client application aggregate. This is the swim lane that I've designated as what an aggregate is. And really, it's just a stream of events. And an event stream is events of this type, which is client application and the aggregate ID. And all of these events are in that stream effectively. Whenever, now the client application was onboarded, and the next thing that would happen would be someone making a request to get an access token. And this would be request access token via client credentials grant. And if that's successful, an access token was issued to the client via client credentials grant. I think this is wrong. I don't believe there should be a refresh token, but we'll look at that in a minute. The problem now comes in when, let's say there is a refresh token and someone wants to get a new access token. Well, they don't have the client application ID, they just have that refresh token, and those refresh tokens live in a different stream designated here. So like, I don't know how to, how to make events go from one stream to another stream. And the idea was to have this projection that anytime an event comes in, you just have, here's all the active refresh tokens, and then some processor that creates new commands to put those events in the correct stream. So for example, if a refresh token was added to the client application stream, this processor picks it up and then says, issue refresh token to client application, which then puts it in to this stream for refresh token. Does that make sense? I know that you probably need to know a lot more about the implementation of event sourcing for that to click, but I can show you what that looks like in code in a minute. I can answer any questions right now before I jump into code. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I would keep going.
Okay,
did
cool.
you ask that question on Slack before? Or was that someone else? Someone else had the exact same question.
Maybe.
About how do you move information to another stream?
I don't think I asked that specific question. I've asked
Someone
questions
was asking
about
how do you make like functional paradigm work where you can only really see the previous events for a particular stream to get the next state. They said, well, what if your state change depends on things that are not in your own stream? Well, the way you do that is exactly what you've shown. So it's nice to see that people are coming to the same conclusions themselves. Hooray for common sense.
Yeah, I stole some of these ideas from Matthias as well. So don't feel like I came up with any of this. One thing I didn't call out was this thing called command authorization. So I needed a way to apply business constraints across streams. And I don't want to describe it without showing you it in code. Just know that when a command passes this boundary, this dotted line, it goes through this command pipeline that if any of them reject the command, then it can't make it through. And that was a way to not have to make a saga or some other, I don't even know what sagas are. I think there's some kind of, I didn't have to do that and it worked for me. So let me just show you the code. I think that's what we're all really here for. But I want to start with the tests. So we were working with request access token via client credentials grant. And the tests are really nice, at least I think they are, because you have, we're going to test that it issues an access token for an onboarded client application. Given that we have a client application that was onboarded, these IDs are just constants. They're not really important. That's why they're kind of hidden. So don't worry about what the actual values are of the, I can tell you if you're curious, but they're just UUIDs or a redirect URI string. Okay. So back to this. So we have a given when then structure for the tests. Given these events, which there's only one event, a client application was onboarded. When someone requests an access token via client credentials grant, then we expect an access token to be issued. Access token was issued to client application via client credentials grant. These are super long event names. I don't know if that's an anti-pattern. It just seemed to fit what I was working with. I like
And
this.
these like map one-to-one with your diagram, right?
This
That's
is
kind of a,
exactly one-to-one with this diagram. When onboard client application, we go back and look. Client application was onboarded, request access token, and then access token was issued. That's basically this event, and or this event, this command, and this event. Does that make sense? Can I select those? Yeah, doesn't really make sense. It makes more sense up here. Request access token via client credentials, and then it spits out access token was issued to client. But I believe this is wrong. There shouldn't be a refresh token for client credentials. If you look at OAuth, there's they describe all the different flows pretty clearly, and this one actually says there's no refresh token. So I've done this incorrectly. We can fix that if you want. We can make that decision in a few minutes on what we're actually going to try to accomplish here. But back to the code. Does that answer your question, Alex? You asked,
yeah.
like, okay. So that's the test structure. The given when then stuff, this is just a test package that I wrote to facilitate like making it look clean. It didn't start out like this. I kind of refactored to this structure, and all of the tests of all the flows are already pre-written. At least I took from the events, the event storm session and or the event modeling session, and just put them in here. Now the way this works is you may dispatch this command. So the when takes the command and just sticks it up here on this test case. But when we call dispatch on the command, let me find it, dispatch. All right, I need to go to the right one. There we go. So it'll call app.dispatch. App is the OAuth application. And like if you wanted to, I think you can only call dispatch and subscribe to events. But if you call dispatch, it takes in the command and it applies the pre-command handlers. We're not going to cover that just yet. We switch on what type of command came in. If it was request access token via, I can't remember, request access token, yeah, client, there it is. It was the very first one. So if the command is this one we expect, we handle it with the client application aggregate. We create a new client application. We go to the event store, get all of the events by the stream, and we get the stream from the command because we can determine what aggregate it's on in the aggregate ID from the command. Now that we have the aggregate, we call handle on it. Handle takes the command in. It switches on the type. If it's refresh access token via client credentials grant, then we check, was the client application onboarded? Does the secret match? And then you just emit the access token was issued. It's pretty straightforward. If you've never seen an event sourcing architecture, it looks really boring, and I think that's the point. There's not a lot of moving parts. There's not a lot of nested if structures. But that's all that's required to satisfy this first test. I'll move it to the right. Does that make sense? Are there any questions on like how the code is organized and or about event modeling? No, good. Okay. Well, now's the time we discuss like how do you want to move this project forward? Do you have questions on like did I do the event modeling correctly? Would you want to make changes there? Do you want to fix the bug that I found with client authorization grant type? Like it should not emit a refresh token. We can either do that. We can add a new flow. I can show you more tests in the app. I can show you tests on how the actual HTTP method calls are made. It's really up to you guys.
I mean, either adding I think adding the flow would be more interesting to me.
Okay, let's do that. since I've already written the code for one of these flows, what we can do is just delete it and start from scratch. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, no, that works for me.
Okay. So let's see. Maybe implicit would be a good place to start.
Are done for implicit or resource owner password. Either one of those would be great.
ROPC has a lot of moving parts.
Cool, no worries.
Let's just delete it all. How about that? All right. So implicit grant. Maybe I can have the code up and this up at the same time. Do you think that would be helpful? I think it would be helpful. Because then you can see how it maps.
So. Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So would you rather see the event storm or the event model that we haven't really, it hasn't been done yet? Maybe we should do that first. Let's do that first.
Yeah.
So what are we missing? We need to implement, maybe if I just copy this and bring it down, so we can see it, implicit. Okay. So what are we missing here with this to do? We've got request access token via implicit grant. That's this command. So the client application is requesting an access token. Where would, I guess we would put the event on the client application. Access token was issued.
Hold up. Why is there a dotted line from the event client application was onboarded to the command?
Oh, this thing? It's a dependency on the client application ID has to go inside of this command. I don't know. I didn't know any way to represent that concept. Like you couldn't make this request unless you had the client application ID. So maybe that comes from, maybe that dependency is really,
it's from the read.
From the read model.
Yeah.
So good catch.
And you spelt client wrong, I think.
You read it wrong?
Unless Client is a friend of yours, I don't know.
It's a different font. It makes eyes really thin. Now see how you see it? It's right there. Okay, thanks for that. So yeah, I guess you emit that event. And that comes from here. So given that a client application was onboarded, when we call request access token via implicit grant, access token was issued to user via implicit grant. Let's write that test. Okay, test. Issues access token. And instead of doing this thing, I can do the my test case that contains, is that correct? Go OAuth2 test case dot. The dot has to go up here. Okay. Given some events, what's the event? Client application was onboarded. Fill all fields. Client ID, client secret, redirect URI. Okay.
That was a sweet shortcut. Is that Golang's shortcut, or did you make that?
Which one?
The fill out the properties.
It's part of Go. You hit option return and
part of Golang.
Oh, Golang. Yes, it's Golang.
Yeah.
Given that event, when we have a command called request access token via implicit grant, fill all fields, user ID, client ID, redirect URI, username. I think that needs to be email address, password. Then we expect it to be access token was issued to user via implicit grant. And the user ID, client ID. What is it not liking here? No, the dot has to be on a different line. And what are we missing? Like that? Okay. Now, since I've already implemented this, should I go delete it so that it doesn't work?
No, but we should at least go look at. I would like to go look at it.
Okay. So let's do this. Let's debug and step through. Where is the app.dispatch? We'll just go right there and follow it all the way through. Let's see if it passes first, and then we can step through. Looks like it failed. It expected these events, but it got something different. It says it rejected due to invalid user. So it looks like we need a user as well. Does that make sense? Because the command has a user ID, there's some path that requires a user to be onboarded. So user was onboarded. Oops.
So you're passing an array of commands. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, passing an array of events that have already happened.
Given these events that happened in the past, user ID, user name, probably email. Yeah. And then a password hash. So the command to onboard a user would have the password, but the event that's emitted is going to have a hash of that password. And I've made sure that these two match up. If you type in this, you'll get this hash, just in case. So let's see if that passes. Okay, that worked. Cool.
So that was an interesting thing that you bumped into. Where on the model then is this user was onboarded dependency?
It probably wasn't there because this was copied and not fully fleshed out. So really the implicit grant, let's look up here. Maybe there's a dependency here. Oh, that's client credentials. Where's implicit?
To the left. Yeah.
There it is.
There we go.
Is user valid? See those dotted lines that go back?
Yeah.
Or does this follow it all the way back? All the way back.
So
It
like
does
you were
require
saying,
user was onboarded.
And you said that right up front, didn't you? Like most things rely on that event having to exist.
So if we copy that one, and that one, maybe that as well, and we bring it over to, oops, implicit, we probably need to move some stuff over first. I don't know a quick way in Miro to move stuff over when you have this. I guess I could just go like this and then drop in this guy. Yeah. There we go. Is that
cool?
Thanks for bringing that up. That was a good catch. Yeah, so now we have user was onboarded right there. Actually, right there. Client application was onboarded right there. And this test structure doesn't care what stream the events are. It's smart enough to go find the correct event in the correct stream. It's just a testing harness that I put together because it was really annoying when I wrote the first version of this. Every time I wanted to have events given, I had to know exactly what the stream was in. It was really painful. Okay. Jason asked about stepping through, so let's step through the code because we know that it works. Because unfortunately, I already implemented that flow. Okay, so we broke on the dispatch. Let's step over. Do you want to see the command, the pre-command handlers for these? I guess we might as well.
Let's come back to that, I think. Let's
Okay.
stick to the test and then come back.
Okay. So we'll skip over those cases. There's a couple of pre-command handlers. Okay, we went through them. Now we switch on the type. The event was request access token via implicit grant. Now we go to the aggregate to handle it. We create a new aggregate, get all the events, pass it to the constructor of the aggregate, pass in a token generator and a clock because you need to assign a, where is this thing? To assign an access token, you need an expiration date, and that's why we have to pass in this clock dependency. And I believe I'm just initializing, do I initialize the clock anywhere? For tests, you can push in a sequential clock, so you always have the exact same result every time you run the tests. But we're gonna ignore that for right now. Let's see, where were we? We're right here. Now we have the aggregate. We're gonna call the handle method on the aggregate. We pass in the command. The command is of type request access token via implicit grant. So that's where we go to. We check if A is if the current aggregate we're working with is onboarded, and we can inspect it right here. It is true. It is not an administrator. I'm not really sure what that means. Is the password valid? We've passed in c.password. The command has the password string pass123. There's a method that just compares the password hash on the aggregate to the password they passed in. If you're curious, we can look at that. Otherwise, we should just gloss over it. Password is valid. Now we're going to admit access token was issued. Now, there's one thing I don't like about this structure so far is I have one method called handle that has a bunch of case statements that have a lot of returns. And this is generally a bad idea to have more than about 4 returns in a function. There's probably a dozen here. I don't know how to refactor this into something more pretty. I don't know if I need to.
You can. What I've seen done before is functions called handle name of command, and then you just have a generic handle function which takes the command and tries to call a function called handle name of command. Do you know what I mean? So it constructs the name of the function it needs to call.
Let's see what it looks like. Handle what? Let's back up. Where was I?
So what was the case you were dealing with?
It was implicit.
Yeah.
So you're saying take the contents of this and create a method called handle that.
Yep. And then then what you can use, you can just you can get rid of your case statement entirely for all of these, and then just your generic handle function looks at the name of the command and tries to call a function called handle name of command.
Ooh. Now Go doesn't have yeah, you couldn't do like a variadic function like this. But no, I guess it's not what it's called. It's I forget what it's called. You'd have to do a little bit of duplication with the word, but yeah, that could work. The only problem is these returns now come into this. This starts getting weird. You have to return Boolean. Luckily, the refactoring knew what to do. I guess this was successful is success. That's kind of what is being returned. I don't like that. I do like the fact that the case statement doesn't have a lot of logic in it. How would you handle that, Alex? Just have this Boolean for these different.
Wait, how would I handle what, sir?
Or does it even matter? Would you even need to return the Boolean and act upon it?
Nope.
Just return.
Yep.
And then nothing. I could dig that. Because if this is an error condition, then break out, and then you no longer need the if. You just call the method. And then you have a case statement. Go ahead.
Yeah, you don't even need the case statement though. If you can write some code to call your function dynamically.
Oh, like have a map that has if it's this event, just go to this function, do like a functional map. We could do that.
No, not even a map. Just say, what's the name of the command, and then call the function called handle name of command. Does that make sense?
Oh, I don't think you can do the class.
Oh,
That's like a dynamic language thing that you see in PHP and Ruby and
PHP.
Oh, you can't do that with Go?
No, we're in a statically typed language. We can switch to Ada if you want, and then we could have, that would be really beautiful.
You can't do any kind of reflection on the thing itself?
You can, but the real question is, should you?
Should you?
But I could dig it. If this case had just, that would be a little bit better. This is starting to look better. But it would also be cool if instead of even having to do this switch, if it was just at the application level, where is this dispatch? Who calls handle? Handle with resource aggregate. It's almost like here at this point, I've got the command on the dispatch. Maybe I just do like a service discovery and find a handler that knows how to handle this command and not even have to do a switch. I wonder if that would be cleaner. Then it would be more open closed. Every time I add a new command, I wouldn't have to also add a case here, go to the aggregate, add a case there. Because that's what is kind of annoying is,
Exactly.
Having to remember that.
That shows up in 3 places, and that's not fun. It shows up in the main entry point in the application, the dispatch method. It shows up in the aggregate, and it shows up in one of the pre-authorization command handlers. I don't know if we have enough time to
overload. Can you just overload the handle function with different, like in Java, if you just have a different type of argument?
Right, not in Go. You can't do like, say you had handle, and then you wanted another one for a different function.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't do that.
No. Okay.
You can do it in Ada, and you can do it in Java and C#. And
man, Go sucks.
It's pretty limited. It's pretty limited. Okay, well, I like where that went. That was cool. We still have more time. Is there anything about this you want me to answer? Any questions, or I can show you more of the code? There's really not a whole lot there.
Maybe the pre-command stuff. I'm glad that you kind of have run into same things that I've run into when experimenting with the switch statements, basically.
Okay.
So, but I would be interested in, I'm just interested in seeing the whole path.
Okay. Let's show you the whole,
yeah.
Let's look at the whole path. Let's just debug and step through. I might need to put that back in though. Dispatch. Here we go. So we're running this test case, which is user was onboarded. Actually not user, request access token via implicit grant. And we came in, let's just redo it because it took me somewhere else. Okay, we got to the dispatch. It received this command. Now we're going through all the pre-command handlers, and the pre-command handlers are initialized right here. There's a resource owner command authorization and then a client application authorization. And these two objects know about their specific streams. They have access to them. I didn't want to have any business logic crossing the streams because once you load an aggregate, you should either lock it or maybe some other advanced ways to look at the version numbers between events. I didn't want to deal with that, so I just created 2 separate ones so they could handle their own stream. So it goes through each one of them. Right now we're looking at the resource owner command authorization, which I believe it's going to need to dive into because it has a user ID that it has to look at. So let's go into the handle method on it. Oh, there wasn't one. Now we're in the resource. Oh, now let's see, where are we? I messed up. Let's do it again. Which handler do we have? We stepped into the resource owner handler, but there was not a, it didn't know about that command in the handle method. We went to the next one. Let's step into it. Oh, maybe that was the response. Should continue would be true. Sorry if I'm getting a little confused. Now it goes into client application. Okay, client, there we go. It does know about this command, and it's going to go grab a client application aggregate. I can show you, let's just step through. What this does is it creates a new client application, goes to the event store, gets all of the events by that stream for this client application stream, which is just, hey, go to this made up event that I just created and get the stream name. And the stream name comes from the aggregate type and the aggregate ID. Now this, the way that I created these events, I just have a file with all of the events and all of the commands, and then I have this generate method to generate extra stuff. And what it does is it generates all of these methods on this event for aggregate type, aggregate ID, and event type, so that I know where to put this in the event store. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's
it's just it's a code generation tool to know where to put the event. Anyways, it goes to the event store, gets all of the events by the client ID, because the command that came in was request access token via implicit grant, but we needed to go to the client ID stream to make this determination whether we can continue or not. Okay, so we loaded up that client application, and now we have the aggregate loaded up for the client ID. It is onboarded, so it'll pass that check. Now we check the redirect URI. We need to make sure that not only is the client ID in secret right, but also the redirect URI before we grant someone, I don't even know if I'm checking to see if the client secret, maybe that client secret check is somewhere else, but we check the redirect URI to make sure that that they're legit.
It matches.
Right. We wouldn't want someone to interject to know your client ID in secret and then like redirect to their application. So that was correct. It returned, I guess, true to continue. Oh, there it is. Now it's returning true. Now we're out of that pre-command handler. Any events that came out of it, there were none. We would save them to the event store, and then we check did any of those fail, or did that last one fail? This is where the dotted line comes in. We made it past this check. Sorry if I'm being too verbose. I just want to make sure that it's clear. And then we go into the regular happy path, or at least the regular path of the command execution, which is handled by the aggregate generally. As far as I know, that's how this stuff works.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Just go back to where you were in the code.
Right here?
Yeah. So saving the pending events here. So my concern, I guess, is transactional boundary issue here. Like, what if you successfully saved events here, but then the application went down before you'd handled the command properly? Is there concerns there that you would be inconsistent?
That's a good question. Maybe whenever the command's finished, then save all the pending events. I wonder if there's a possibility that a pre-command handler would need to emit an event that later something else acts upon. That's a possibility, but I like where you're going with it. Just have one save.
That's kind of what you're trying to avoid, isn't it?
Right. Well, these events here, typically, at least in this application, are the non-happy paths. That's whenever you come in. And I wasn't sure if these should even be events. Where are we? We're on implicit grant. So all of these red arrows go to these potential events that are emitted from the command pipeline or the pre-authorization. I didn't know if they needed to be on a different event stream or if they should be on the aggregate. I just kind of put them where it made sense here. I don't know. And on that topic, I still have, where are my to-dos? I still don't know what to do with these cases. So say I need a refresh token and I need to go to a token generator to generate one. Well, there are some that can potentially throw an error and it failed to generate the token. It has nothing to do with OAuth application, it has everything to do with the server implementation. What should I do here? Because right now it just fails. Should I put the event on that stream that I was currently working on? Should I put an event in a different stream, like an error stream? Or should I just log it to the file system? This is where I'm outside of my bounds. I've never delivered an event sourced application before. Feel free to chime in if anyone knows the answer. It looks like we all...
Well, I was going to keep myself muted for this whole thing, but generally, unless it's important for state, you don't store anything. What is the minimalistic approach? Would not storing this make your implementation fail?
No, and perhaps it doesn't need to be stored and I don't need the to-do. I can just remove it and just ignore that case. What would need to happen is on the HTTP side, see, what we talked about so far has everything to do with the application and the domain, the bounded context inside of it. It has nothing to do with the delivery mechanism. So maybe that's where the error should be handled. I kind of agree with that. That's why I didn't really emit any events here. Now the events on the error conditions.
Draw it on your event model. See, you know exactly where
here.
you want. If it's going to be an event, where would it be? Now it's fine to have. A lot of times with event modeling, you do have a swim lane for external systems, but you explicitly label that you're not responsible for these. You're giving them in the event model as a reference point on a timeline to give context to what the heck's going on, and that may be very well, a client using what you're working on.
Sure. I want to call out there are
as to why are these calls being made. So in this application, it might be you have some little hotel system or some little Trello board like site that's using this to give you context.
Right. There is a failure case where if someone attempts to use an authorization code because, let's see, if someone attempts to use an authorization code twice, you should reject all access tokens previously generated as well as refresh tokens. So like there's this whole process that kicks off whenever someone attempts to do something incorrectly.
Then that failure is something that you need to know that happened, and it is kicking off a state change. Your system is different. Think of state machines. It's now behaving differently. It's kicking off an entire new process internally to get rid of things, change its own state. So that's your answer. The thing that event modeling is designed for is to analyze state over time for what you're responsible for within your system boundary, right? Systems thinking approach. So those are things you have to analyze by asking yourself, is this relevant for me to be able to keep proper state as my system gets used? So to make it easier to understand to people that are maybe non-technical, use the event model to show that, hey, I can't make a decision. I don't have an event for that here. My system looks the same as it did before, and I'm needing the external system to bring me some information maybe within the command, but you can clearly draw a line as to where that information sits, either on this side of the border or this side of the border. And you have to answer why it sits there. Right. And if it gets complicated, you always string things out further left to right to show bit by bit where the information's coming from, where it's landing, where it's going to be used. And you can analyze that on a very finely grained scale. So you just start to ask, do I have the right implementation, at least in terms of the flow of information that I'm thinking of before I get into the coding.
Cool.
I'll leave it at that.
Certainly helps.
Let's see if you guys can. Let's see if you guys can figure it out, because I don't want to. I don't want to be leading all of these. So I want you guys to figure it out.
I found that I learned a lot more whenever I just dive in and try a few different ways.
Yeah.
Having this test as a safety net really makes it gives me the flexibility to try different stuff. And thank you guys for providing some options. It's super helpful to get more people's input. Jason, was that enough of the code that you wanted to look through? Or was there more you
Yeah,
wanted
that was
to
super interesting.
Okay.
No, and it's actually good timing too, because I'm gonna have a sprint retro very soon.
Okay.
That I'm gonna have to bow out to, but thank you.
Okay. Well, we got through all of this. Oh, go ahead.
Some background noise. Am I audible?
It is. There's a little bit of background noise.
Okay, so I'll make it quick. This is all new to me as well. I'm new to event sourcing as well, but in my mental model, if there is a view connected to an event, then it gives you some context of whether it should be stored or discarded. That's one way I look at it. If there's an adjoining view from an event, like the ones that you have, active refresh tokens are coming
Right
out
there.
of an event, right? Yeah. So if you have a view or some input being given to another processor, then the event becomes important and needs to be stored. That's one way I think about it. The other way is coming from a CQRS heavy world. Those orange post-its map very well to domain events for me. And when I'm thinking about domain events, I'm also thinking about what are they for? What is the reason why I'm even considering emitting those events or storing them? That gives a little more context about whether that is important to be stored or what's to be done, in what format should it be stored, etc. Does it make sense?
As far as the domain events mapping to CQRS?
As far as whether something should be discarded silently or deciding whether it should be stored and who is the consumer.
Oh, I'm not an expert to answer that, so I don't know.
No, I think I get what you're saying as well. Like and kind of like what Adam was saying, like if there's a state change, is there a view that needs to know about that state?
Yep. Yep.
Then that event is by definition important to your system. But if you're struggling to find a view, or if you struggle to really give a monkeys about what happens with that event, then maybe it's time to lose it. And I think I tend to on the side of capture all the events, no matter what, and maybe there's a process that I need to do as well, which is to trim them back and go, okay, I just don't care about this event. And perhaps you're trapped there, Jamie, in that kind of no man's land of like, I have this event, but I don't know what to do with it. And so maybe that's the answer, just get rid of it.
Exactly. Oh, one more thing I wanted to show before Jason leaves. You can actually run this locally, this project, if I can just demonstrate it real quick if you'd like. Let's do it here. There we go. $8080. I'm also exposing port 8081, and you'll see why I do that in a second. Because it packages up range.db with this binary.
Mm-hmm.
The OAuth server is here. I think there's only a login page, but it doesn't really do anything yet. I haven't written tests for the UI yet, but it comes packaged with range.db, which is kind of cool. You can spin up the UI if you'd like. And whenever it boots up, I do I need to initialize it with some events. And so I initialize a user was onboarded, a user were granted administrator role. Let's just see it here. Client application was onboarded, just so you can test it out. I also have some debugging stuff that can help. So if you were an application and you wanted to get an access token, and you make this request, it would work, and there's your access token, and you can move on and like work with your application.
That's cool.
If I refresh over here,
now in range.db, yeah.
Right, that event, since I have debugging turned on, it got an event type, access token was issued, and we can see it over here. Access token was issued to client application via client credentials grant, and there's the client ID. If you want to see the API, there's an API for it. So here's access token was issued. If you don't like JSON, you can do ND-JSON. I don't know if I have that working on this one just yet, so I can't demonstrate that. But there's different ways you can consume this API. Actually, I do want to show you one more thing. It maps over to what I found in the event storm. Where is my event storm? Right.
Is RangeDB all in memory? Where are you storing that?
It's in memory, this version. There's an on-disk one as well if you want to do it on disk. There's this concept of an epoch event. Everything depends on a user being granted an administrator role before you can kick off a bunch of stuff. And that caused me some problems. But what I did was I say user was granted administrator role whenever the system starts up, and I just put in some metadata. This is an epoch event. Whoops. I can show you what that looks like in code. So we do in the main program, whenever we're starting the OAuth server, I just initialize a DB with these events. And this is a lot better, in my opinion, than having like this SQL file that starts up your application that you have to constantly maintain as the tables change. This is just a bunch of either dispatching commands, or since I need an epoch event, just emitting events in the system. And this allows me to kick off this thing so you can play with it. Cool.
That's pretty cool.
One of the nicest things about event source systems is just setting up that scenario for development or testing. And we often just take the event stream from like the actual client, the production system, and say, we're going to use those events just to set up the situation exactly like what happened in production. So it's really, really cool to do that. We rarely do the commands. In a few systems, the commands are retained along with the resulting events or failure events, but the events themselves do make a way easier scenario builder than SQL does, for sure.
I'm going to demonstrate an error event getting put in the event store, along with how different streams work. So I'm using the wrong client ID, and it's going to say, oh, invalid client. An event was registered, it was rejected due to invalid client application ID. So now we see that client application has this new one, but this event number is now 0 for this stream, because this is a different aggregate ID. And if I click on that, I can get this. This is actually the stream for this aggregate, for this error. And this is the one for the correct client application. So that's what this RangeDB supports, getting events by aggregate type as well as getting it by stream. I think that's all I wanted to show. If you have any questions, I'm happy to elaborate, but way ahead on time. I expected this to take a lot longer. Thanks for bearing with me and looking at my project. Were there any questions that we didn't answer, or any problems that you see that I'm going to face in the future trying to deploy this? Because I'd like to deploy this on an application soon.
I did, apart from the whole sort of the commands pipeline thing and events happening there, and then events happening afterwards as you handle the commands. So there's some transactional boundaries that might catch you out there. It looks great. I love it.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I imagine
cool to see one. Yeah, it was great. I just wanted to chime in. It was great before I go. I'm gonna write it.
Thanks, Jason. Yeah, people keep talking about not having good examples online of different like CQRS or event sourcing, and I don't know, this was good timing to build a project when I had some time off. Hopefully I can finish it and maybe we can use it as reference. Cool. Okay, let's do a retrospective. What went well about this? What did you like? It doesn't have to be specific about how the quality of the code or the project, but what about this session did you like? And this is a question for anyone who would.
I'm going to try and let other people speak.
You can also say things that didn't go so well. That's fine too.
I think it was a great foray into event programming, something that I'm relatively new to. It was pretty easy to with the pictures there with the chart to follow your streams and swim lanes and be able to kind of conceptualize what that might look like in code, and then to actually see it in code afterwards made it very easy to follow.
Cool. Thanks for that. That's helpful.
I would say one of the problems, one of the eternal problems of demonstrating this stuff is having a domain that's complex enough to show off some of the deeper edge cases of this stuff, and having like a really boring, simple one that everyone's seen 1,000 times, like a to-do app or you know, the banking example and what have you, which is just too trivial. I mean, it explains the basics, but then it's just too trivial otherwise. So I think maybe OAuth, it might be a little bit too complex, because I've actually seen this diagram like 12 times and I still don't fucking get it. So I think you really do have to work through it to truly, or already understand OAuth2 well to fully get it. But what a great place to start. So I certainly would like to see more projects like this that are just a little bit more complex than your average bear, and so we can get a little bit more value out of seeing how it's done. And really, these are going to be patterns, right? Like, we all kind of know that this stuff it suddenly becomes simple and boring to plumb this stuff together. And the exciting, interesting part is the modeling bit. We are actually digging into the business and going, oh yeah, cool, this is how we're going to react to this. The coding part becomes boring. Really, it's just plumbing at the end of the day. So finding those patterns, like, how do we solve this pattern? Well, we do it with these bricks, and it's finding what those patterns are, I think, is where we need to go next.
Yeah, that's a key insight. When I first started the project, I did it the CRUD style. I had a repository layer. I thought I was writing decent code, but the tests started getting really complex and ugly. And I had a conversation with you, Alex, about this, and you said, why wouldn't you do this in event sourcing? And I said, I don't know. I guess I'm going to give it a shot.
That's always been the thing, hasn't it? The conversation is always around, if it's not a complex domain, just use CRUD. Like, only use event sourcing and CQRS for complicated things. And I think a lot of us here on this call agree with, like, everything can be done in this manner. In fact, it's actually simpler to do it and more easy to, you know, the cognitive load of looking at that code is a lot less than trying to figure out somebody's weird abstractions on CRUD.
Yeah, that's the key part. Is the test for the CRUD was awful, and the implementation was kind of messy, but not too bad. But the test for the event sourced is beautiful. Like, if you're not a programmer or you've never seen Go, you could understand what's happening just by reading the words, because they're all business words. They're not technical jargon like database. Like, the word database doesn't show up anywhere. You might see event store, but that's kind of hidden away behind the BDD test structure. The thing is, writing the event sourced implementation kind of got boring after a while. Every time I added a new flow, it's like, I'm just writing the same if statement, and then I'm emitting the event. Like, it doesn't feel like I'm accomplishing very much. But because I have those tests, that's where it kind of clicks for me. And just, I don't know, if I didn't have the test, I wouldn't want to write code this way. Well, I don't want to write code anyway without tests, but that's a different story. Thanks, Alex. That's really helpful.
Full marks from me. I haven't seen. Well, first of all, it's nice to see some other people doing this besides me about event modeling and event sourcing. So full marks for Golang. Not enough stuff done in Golang. It should be a language that's used for not just back-end things and infrastructure stuff. So having things that are usable, you know, all the way up to line of business, excellent. Awesome. Clean implementation, clear mapping between the model and what your solution does. Absolutely fantastic. Can't wait to use it. Can't wait to put this on the event modeling site as a resource. So
cool.
Excellent. Thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, thanks for the kind words. I'll be happy to knock this out if I can in the next few weeks and get all these flows done. but I can't promise anything.
No,
I might get
I
the
think
ones
it's
that,
wonderful. I think just for the people to be able to see what it is in reality in a language like Go. I'm doing the same kind of stuff in other languages. So the more examples we have, the more bindings we have to event stores of all different types and different stacks. It's just it's really helpful for the community at large, trying to get to that wonderful feeling that you have now when tests make sense, and why once you start, you can't go back to writing ugly tests anymore. And the only way to do it is with this breadcrumb trail of how you got to a situation. Those are beautiful stories to use as tests. So thank you. Full marks for me. I mean, I love it. Very
thank
happy.
you. Thank you. What I uncovered last week was building this OAuth implementation made me harden the RangeDB implementation, because the way in Go to unmarshal from JSON, which is typically how you're going to store it on disk, unless you're going to do some binary implementations, which I probably wouldn't recommend. So you store it in JSON on disk, but whenever you pull that event out as a string into an object in Go, which is a statically typed language, that event object in the envelope, the record envelope, which has like the aggregate ID, the event ID, all the extra metadata that you don't necessarily care about, but you need to persist and like keeping sequential IDs, whatever. When that event comes out, it's a pointer to an object, but that only happens whenever you're working with the disk implementation of the database, which is using level DB. It's a key value, sequential key value database. When I use the in-memory version, those events come back as a regular object. So switching on the type, let me just show you an example. And this was a major problem with this implementation. Let's look at this. So let's find this command. Any place that, whenever you switch on the type here, and it comes back like this. Well, what if it was a pointer? And I had to resolve that in the range. Because of this application, I had to really flesh out all of these different moving parts. And generally, that's not a problem on commands. It would be on events. It would be like, where's email? So I have a projection that in order to log in as a user with your email and password, you need the user ID, but you don't have access to it. You need this projection to go from an email address to the user ID. And in order to have this projection work, I accept all of these events, but I need to look at the event type. And if that event type is a pointer or not a pointer is a problem. And I almost didn't want to bring this up, but the point I'm trying to make is if I didn't write this simple implementation, that database that I'm writing on the side is kind of worthless. You can't use it. If someone tries it and it doesn't work, then what's the point? So it was really good to flesh out the actual implementation and find those hidden things that you wouldn't have found. Like, oh, whenever you unmarshal an object from a database, it actually is a pointer to an object, not just a regular object. And now all of your projections are broken. Whereas the project that Alex and I worked on, all we did was write projections, and it was an in-memory database, and we didn't even have this problem. So this was a fun thing to work on. And if anyone wants to contribute, I'm happy to continue doing pairing sessions on it. I think I've showed Alex a few times, but we haven't gone too much into detail. But with that, I mean, we can finish early. I don't have much else to share unless you have questions for me.
Hey, Jamie, I really love the fact that you started off from the test cases and you took time to actually build up those test cases beautifully. I think very few people spend time on the testing side and they spend most of the time on the coding side, right? But upkeep of the test cases generally eases up the whole flow, and you actually wrote something on your own to give it that BDD structure. That was awesome. I really like that.
Thank you. That was something I learned about 5 or 6 years ago. Was the tests matter almost more than the actual production code, especially whenever I'm fleshing out an application. Like, I don't know how to write it, but I know how to write the test. Then I can just play around with the implementation as much as I want, keep shuffling that deck of cards until it lines up, and then the application works, and I'm satisfied that it works.
That's awesome. That was one of the biggest inspirations for event modeling, is to have that mindset and not to get stuck in the minutia of the how, and have the what and what people see and what people have as state. That's why the UI is so important. That's why the events are so important, so that everyone can agree what success looks like, and then just leave people to play with the implementation until the thing does what the event model shows. End the story, right? So I love the connections here. Wonderful.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks, Alex. I learned a ton. The questions I had were, how do I deal with these error conditions? Should I be storing those events? Adam, you answered that for me really well. And Alex, you helped me walk through how to pull this kind of nasty code out a little bit more. If you look at code climate for these projects, it'll tell you like where the nasty parts are, and it's usually those switch statements, having all those returns. It's like, I don't like this. So you're now getting a D on your code climate. I can show you real quick what I'm talking about if that doesn't make any sense. So on this OAuth project, I have test coverage and maintainability in code climate. And if we go into maintainability, where do you, oh, here, maintainability 3 or B.
This is your humble brag? It's only a B, I mean.
No, it's the technical debt got raised whenever I was adding a lot of switch statements. And if we look at the code and you go into maintainability, you can see this this authorization. It used to be a D until I broke it out into 2 of them. Now there's a B and a C instead of 1 D. But it's complaining because it has a lot of return statements. Method handle has 12 return statements, right? Because you've got the switch and you get all these different flows. It's a little harder to follow. This may be it may not be as much of a problem with the event source, but if you have like a regular function and it has a ton of returns, then I can see that being a problem. But I still want to tackle this. This is like my next goal, is to apply that pattern that Alex pointed out and maybe reduce some of this complexity. But yeah, a little humble brag. I actually think it's important to have the code coverage visible in the project. I don't think the number is important. I don't think having 100% or 90% or 80% is important. It's knowing what you have, what tests are actually executing is important. But if you're a manager, like that's not something you should be measuring at all. That's just my opinion. Okay, well, thanks everybody. I think we should end early. I don't see any reason to sit around and just talk about it more if we don't have to. If there are no more questions, we'll call it a day.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jamie.
Thank you so much, Jamie.
Thanks, guys. I'll see you next time.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.